Hello everybody, and welcome to the Skills 2.0 update for the item and equipment tier list. Instead of doing a completely new tier list as I did with the June update, I figured I'd just make an update to the existing list. There's no need to cover the items that haven't changed at all. So if you're looking for a ranking of all items, check out the June update tier list after this video to see the rest of the items. A link is in the top right and description below. As usual, the rankings I'll give the items is on a scale from S being the best to F being the worst. The context for the rankings is on monsoon difficulty. Let's begin by covering the brand new items and ones directly changed in the patch notes. The new focus crystal gets an A on melee characters, so loader and mercenary, and a C on everybody else. While its effect is powerful, 15% extra damage per stack is nothing to laugh at. However, the radius of 13 meters is quite small. In fact, it's basically melee range, so more often than not, you will be outside of this radius and therefore not getting its bonus damage. The reason it gets an A and not an S on melee is because of its damage bonus being added to your other damage bonuses like armor piercing rounds and not being multiplicative. Basically, any source of increased damage you have are all pooled together for one big total, except for things that reduce enemy armor, which we'll get to in a bit. So if you have one crystal and one armor piercing rounds, you won't get the 15% damage bonus and then have the 20% of the AP applied after. Rather, both amounts are added into a 35% total damage increase. They do not scale off of one another. So factoring that with its condition of being in a certain radius, and the focus crystal gets an A from me. Despite doubling its stacking effect, Sticky Bomb is still sadly at D tier. There is no reason to print these boys anymore and lose your actually useful white items in the process. Now, they aren't terrible to stack, not at all, but their rather lackluster damage coupled with a low proc chance before getting a few stacks means you're better off still looking for other sources of on-hit damage. Stickies are not gonna bring the bang for their buck. Topaz Brooch retains its S. Going from 20 barrier per kill to 15 may seem like a lot on paper. After all, that is a 25% nerf to the item. However, the power of the brooch is anything but absent, and once you start stacking shaped glass especially, you won't notice the difference at all. The fact that barrier has its own one-shot protection built in makes any sustainable source of it extremely powerful, and as it stands, Topaz Brooch is still the most consistent source of barrier, although not by much, and we'll get to that in a bit. The post-nerf Guillotine easily retains its S ranking. Even being pushed to the depths of uncommon rarity could not stop this powerhouse of an item. Being able to instantly kill elite monsters under a certain threshold is very powerful, and especially with the addition of the Malachite and now Celestine elites. It couldn't be any better. Well, it could, but they don't have to go to red tier, so please don't do that, Hopu. The new Lepton Daisy gets a D. Sadly, it's too situational to actually get use of its effect. Yes, it can come in clutch in the teleporter fights and heal you at the last second, but not being able to guarantee when the heal will actually hit you is pretty bad. There are way too many green items that I'd rather have than a Daisy, so it deserves to be down in D tier with the rest of the undesirables. The reworked Aegis gets an S with adequate amounts of healing and a B without. Aegis was completely reworked with the September update and so far proves to be a great success. Is it the best red item? No, not even close. Is it trash tier and not worth the money? Also no. Your passive HP regen does not count towards the overhealing, so you'll need things like leeching seeds and harvester sites to begin to see its effect take place. But once you get some healing going, oh boy does Aegis feel good. Removing the 20% HP cap to its barrier was an absolutely fantastic change, which, let's be real, it literally makes no sense why that cap exists in the first place when we had Topaz Brooch with no cap. Like, what the heck? So again, if you have good amounts of healing, Aegis is an S, and if you don't, it sits at B tier. Hammering its way down here is the brand new Shattering Justice. This item sound effect is worth its cost alone. But no, really, it gets an S tier. Removing 60 armor from an enemy is an absolutely bonkers amount. Let's do a quick example of just how much armor reduction actually improves your damage. Non-boss enemies do not have any armor. Even with elite affixes, a brass contraption, stone golem, lesser wisp, etc. will never have any armor. Most bosses have 20 armor with the exception of the worms and vagrants, they have 15. So 20 armor is roughly a 17% damage reduction using the game's formula. Let's say you hit for 1000 damage. So a 17% mitigation would mean your 1000 damage goes to 833. When Shattering Justice is in effect, the 20 armor goes to a negative 40 armor, and negative armor is calculated a bit differently. Negative 40 armor is roughly a 28% damage increase, so your 1000 damage would go to 1280. So taking the difference between the two amounts, 1280 minus 833, and the result is an increase of 447 damage, or a 54% increase to your original amount of damage. damage. That is quite the increase considering this happens at the very end of your damage calculations and is separate from other sources like armor piercing and focus crystal. As a result, Shattering Justice easily deserves its place as an S tier red item. The new lunar item is Strides of Heresy, and it gets an S on the Commando and Rex, and well, it depends on the rest of the survivors. Let me explain. Its effect is that it replaces your survivor's utility skill with Shadow Fade, which renders you intangible, gives you movement speed and a tiny bit of flight, and finally heals you for 25% over your HP. All of this happens over a 3-second duration, and each additional stack of the item adds another 3 seconds. Being intangible simply means that no new sources of damage can harm you. If you are burning or bleeding before using Shadow Fade, those effects will continue to damage you. Otherwise, you are invulnerable for the rest of the duration. It's essentially an oh crap skill. Now, the issue is that it entirely replaces your shift ability. On Rex and Commando, this is a straight up better skill because a measly roll with no iframes and a wacky jumping skill aren't nearly as appealing as movement speed, flying, invulnerability, and a heal. Oh, and did I mention it has a 6-second cooldown? On everybody else, well, it's up to you. For me, on Mercenary and Loader, especially Loader, I would never trade my shift away. It is too integral to how I play those characters, and I would have to change my entire playstyle if I grabbed Strides. But hey, I'll put the item as a B on everybody else because after all, we all play the game differently. But if you don't take this on Commando and Rex, you are literally trolling. Moving on to the equipment here, Blast Shower gets a D. Honestly, it's just not that useful. It's essentially a cleanse that removes any debuffs from you as well as destroying enemy projectiles in a tiny radius, and I do mean tiny radius, around you. It's too situational to warrant the equipment slot, and you're better off holding a foreign fruit instead, which fruit isn't even worth the slot anyway. So what does that make Blast Shower? Well, worse is the answer. It gets a D from me. The Crowdfunder got a buff going from a 0.2 proc coefficient to a 1.0. However, it really doesn't matter. The damage is still laughable at all stages of a run, and due to how proc chains work, the items it does end up procking will, by extension, be doing a negligible amount of damage. It simply is not worth the equipment slot, but because it's not entirely useless, it gets a C. Volcano Egg gets a D. Like multi-shift, once you hit a target, they cannot be damaged from the effect again, meaning at best, you'll be dealing 1300% damage every 30 seconds, but you can't use your other skills, meaning attacking, evading, and jumping are not allowed, and you are still vulnerable to damage in the effect. So hey, if you ever felt like dying to an Elder Lemurian's fire breath for no reason on stage 4, then I guess this is the equipment for you. D tier. Alright, those were all the new additions and items that were changed with the September update. However, we're not done yet. I want to re-rank some of the items given the region changes on Monsoon, as well as based on the more experience I've gained since the June update. Starting here, I wanted to briefly go over the personal shield generator. Now, I'm not actually re-ranking it, and its effect was unchanged with the patch. However, in my June update tier list, I went over how shields were not cut in half in accordance with shaped glass, meaning a single shield gen could potentially ruin the entirety of your one-shot protection and thus your run. This is no longer the case, and all sources of shield are now diminished correctly with shaped glass stacking. However, you can still mess up your one-shot protection by simply having at least 10% of your total health as shields. Cutting your HP with glass will not change that. So I'd still recommend avoiding shield gens except to feed them to the 3D printer. Their effect is not worth the downside, and they will remain a D tier item. Let's talk about early healing. The Cautious Slug is now an S. Monster Tooth is now an A in the early game and D all other times. Medkit is now an S early game and C all other times. And Titanic Knurl is an S in the early game and remains an A otherwise. If you didn't catch it in the patch notes, we were unknowingly receiving a 250% increase to our passive region because that region, which was only supposed to be for drizzle difficulty, was being applied to all difficulties. Even if you didn't read it, you probably have noticed it in game. So all healing in the early game became extremely valuable, regardless of how consistent that healing source is. Honestly, pick up a healing drone or two in addition to any healing items you find. Take any and every source of it that you can get. I honestly find it funny how much a difference it makes in the early game to have a Monster Tooth now. I actually find myself looking for the orbs on kill rather than just mindlessly running around. Lastly here, let's talk about the double band combo. Now, both of these items were untouched and are still very powerful. However, I wanted to lay rest the misinformation that I and others have been spreading about their proc rate. In short, if you have at least one of each band, the 8% chance to proc is shared between the two, meaning it is the same roll and is only checked once per instance of a proc. Just because when you have both, they go off at the same time does not actually equate to a higher proc chance. It is still only an 8% chance. Despite this mishap, fortunately the items are still very strong, so their rankings are unchanged. S for the Fireband and A for the Ice. Just know that the 8% chance is always an 8% chance total. Alright, and that does it with the September update for the item and equipment tier list. If you disagree with anything I said or need some further clarification on an item, leave a comment below. I read it all, I I promise. And again, if you're looking for the rankings of all items, you can check out my full item and equipment tier list in the top right and description below. If you'd like to ask me some questions in real time or just come hang out and watch me play the game, you can follow my stream at twitch.tv/Woolie Gaming, where I play Risk of Rain 2 about 4 days out of the week. Consider joining our Discord server as well for notifications when I upload here on YouTube or go live on Twitch. Also, if you just want a place to hang out, talk Risk of Rain 2 with others, play with them, or do anything else, our Discord is a great place to be. Links to both are below. Thank you for watching, and be on the lookout for my loader character guide swinging in here within a couple days. Yeehaw, brother!